Welcome everybody. We might make a start if a couple of people want to take their seats. I'm Lisa Fraser from NDS and James Harvey from NDS, and I'll be facilitating today.
So last time, good morning. Last time we were here, we said that we'd do. People asked for some information on direct payments under Your Life Your Choice. So we've got the direct payments team here, so they'll give you an update on that. Last time as well, we talked about holding next year some workshops with host providers. So we've got some information about that, and I've got some, a questionnaire sort of thing for you, so that we can try and get an idea about what you really want to do. And I'll give you a bit of an update on the health check and where the health check is up to, and we're going to give you a really quick update on where we're up to with restricted practices. And then happy for you to ask anything else that you might want an update on.
Thank you. So thank you very much to our speakers for coming, and I'd just like to introduce them. So many of you will know Paul Gravel from the Department of Community, Child Safety and Disability Services. Many of you will know Fiona Anderson from the National Disability Insurance Agency from the Queensland branch. And I'm not sure how many of you know Deb Hoffman, who is our trial site coordinator from National Disability Services. So thank you all for coming today. On the invitation that was sent out to you, we said we would have a discussion today about the similarities and the differences between the Your Life Your Choice Queensland program and the National Disability Insurance Scheme, or the program and the services and supports that are available under that program, and points of difference and points of similarities between the two programs, if you like. Many providers have been raising questions both with NDS, host providers with NDS, but also with the Your Life Your Choice team. There's I suppose a level of chatter and concern going on about the differences between the two. So we want to take an opportunity today to have a constructive discussion about that. What we can first identify, what are the similarities, the points of difference, and then what we might be able to do, if anything, to try and align as much as possible the work you're doing now in your readiness for the NDIS, and aligning the work you're doing and the investment you're doing in Your Life Your Choice, and particularly back-end work as service providers in the Your Life Your Choice program, so that you're not feeling that that's a time-limited kind of investment, and then are going to have to change again once the NDIA or NDIS hits Queensland. So we've just framed a few questions, if you like, and they're a bit like loose questions, so this is a bit of an informal discussion, and fairly obvious why we've had the three different people here and representatives, but I'd like the audience to be able to ask any questions that you have. But we have 1 hour, so we'll have to be tight. So firstly, and probably to Paul and Fiona in particular, it'd be helpful if you could outline the similarities in the Your Life Your Choice program to the NDIA, and any kind of key differences that you're aware of. And I mean, providers in the room are probably beginning to become aware of some of this anyway, so, and please feel free if you want to sort of chime in here after Paul speaks.
Yeah, okay. So I might go first. Fiona and I haven't discussed this, but anyway. Look, when Your Life Your Choice was introduced, it was never meant to be a direct preparation for the implementation of the National Disability Insurance Scheme. It was always meant to be about two main foci. One around preparing people with disabilities and their carers for decision making and thinking about their services as services that they could manage and control at a degree of levels. When the initial thinking was done around Your Life Your Choice, it was very much in the context of how do we improve those capacities for people, and probably at a time when a lot of the detail around the National Disability Insurance Scheme wasn't available to us. The second thing we were aiming to do with the introduction of Your Life Your Choice was to assist service providers to be prepared in the sense of thinking about service delivery in a different way. So moving away from our traditional models of service delivery and moving to an approach where individuals have much more control over their service delivery options. So it was very much those sort of two general themes that we were looking for. As we've moved through the last couple of years, and as we've become clearer about what the National Disability Insurance Scheme is going to be like and how it will be implemented from 2016 in Queensland, it's become clear that there are a number of elements of Your Life, Your Choice that are not directly transferable to the National Disability Insurance Scheme. We've always had a view that this next year, so 2015, would be a year where we were working with host providers in particular around those future roles in the National Disability Insurance Scheme and how we would transition from a host provider model to an NDIS from mid-2016. We know that there is a level of uncertainty for people and a level of lack of clarity about exactly how you would transition a Your Life, Your Choice host provider arrangement into an NDIS. That's not something that we would have wanted to have in place, but it's the way things have worked out. So I guess what I'd say to you is we are well aware of those tensions and the difficulties that face host providers, but we are committed in 2015 to working with host providers around how we go through that transition process. The other thing I would say, and perhaps one of the other speakers can give a bit more detail about this, but we have also been talking with the National Disability Insurance Agency about the plan manager role and the host provider role as it exists in Queensland, and where the linkages might be in the future for people moving into the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Now, there is no certainty about that at the moment. We're still working with NDIA. We're hoping that by about the end of this calendar year, we'll get some further information from NDIA that will give us a clearer position about potential plan manager roles and how those might look in the future.
Okay, so I'll talk about it from the perspective of the National Disability Insurance Agency, and I'll try not to repeat anything that Paul's already said. But from the agency's perspective, the similarities...
Sorry, Fiona, I just wondered if you could talk up a bit. I'm trouble hearing.
Sure. From the perspective of the agency, the similarities between Queensland's Your Life, Your Choice, and in particular the host provider role, and the plan management role and the concept in the NDIS of the focus on the participant and choice, the principles of choice and control. The similarities are that in Queensland there is an ongoing focus on the development of an individualised plan to achieve goals, enabling the exercise of choice and control and decision making. It's probably not as widespread and not as strong as it is in the NDIS, which is a start-up. The second similarity is the in the host provider element of Your Life, Your Choice. There is a sliding scale of options for managing the financial aspects of plans, and that's similar to the NDIS. The differences, of course, is that Your Life, Your Choice is capped funding. The NDIS is not capped funding. The current entry and access and eligibility to Your Life Your Choice is not quite the same as access to the NDIS, and obviously that's one of the most important areas that Queensland and the NDIA are working together on right now, have been for some time. And it's a really important area that we have to align as closely as possible. And Your Life Your Choice bundles, I guess, more the host provider role bundles a variety of services and supports, which in the NDIS are separated, and they're delivered at a separate cost for each service and support. So that's probably one of the key elements that host providers need to be very clear on. And while there are, certainly differences, we think the opportunities are great. So the key learning from NDIS trial sites was that most participants were not prepared to develop a goal-oriented plan, because that's what the NDIS is. It's not funding because you have a disability, it's funding to enable you to achieve goals related to your disability. One of the very obvious key learnings for the agency was the need for more intensive pre-planning sessions, and that's now offered in all the trial sites, and that will be offered in Queensland as well. So Queensland obviously doesn't have a trial site, but is offering already capacity building of participants and families to help them understand the NDIS better and have a clearer picture of what the NDIS may be able to do for them, and how they can respond to the NDIS opportunity and maximise the benefits of the plan to them. So this is underway in 9 funded NDIS participant readiness projects, which the Queensland Government is managing, in which the NDIA is playing a close role, and we all attended a one-day workshop on Friday to hear about the learnings so far and plan progress for the next 12 months. And of course, the obvious thing is that the greater the understanding that Queenslanders, participants, families and providers have of self-direction as the path to self-determining your life, the better. And we do try to make a very clear distinction between self-direction, which, as I say, is determining the goals that you want to achieve and the types of supports that you think will help you do that, and how those supports are organised, paid for and delivered. And we distinguish between self-management, which is financial management of the plan, and increasingly other aspects of managing the plan, which we can discuss in a bit more detail. So if we can be clear about those, work and understand the similarities and work on the differences, we think that will speed up entry of Queensland into the NDIS. It doesn't mean it will bring forward the entry date, but it will just make the path much smoother and have a lot more clarity for everyone involved. And of course it should improve the quality of Queensland plans developed by participants and the NDIA. Thank you.
Deb, if you wanted to comment on any of those points, but also to contribute a little bit to your experience of plan management in the trial sites.
Okay, a little bit about what's been happening in the trial site. So my role has been with NDS, has been the last 2 years, has been going around and looking at all the trial sites and talking to providers about how it's had an impact on their operations. So certainly I don't need to repeat it in terms of the need for strong capacity building, not only from the participants' point of view, but also from the provider's point of view, getting ready for that transition. We've certainly learned that even with the trials, that providers have needed quite a lot of time and energy and support in getting ready for transition. Just in terms of bundling though, I know you talked a little bit about bundling is happening in Queensland here. It is something that's about to be trialled in some of the trial sites now, where some of the supports can be bundled as well within that person's plan. So we've only just seen that being introduced with plans in the second year of the trial. So in the first year of the trial for the eastern states, all the items were actually line items in the plan, but now there's an ability to have those line items bundled. I guess the things that we have learnt though from the trial that I should just give some observations about is that in the first year, plan management, as was just mentioned, wasn't actually taken up by anybody really in any significant way in any of the 4 trial sites. So there are 3 options at the moment. Yeah, are you want me to keep going or not?
Yeah, it's just those options.
Yeah, so there are 3 options that participants can take up. They can decide to self-manage, they can decide to engage a plan management provider, which is like your host provider, or they can ask the agency to manage their funds. And they can do any 3 combinations of those at any point in time in any given plan. So they might decide to do all 3 at once, or they might decide to go down one pathway. So what we found in the first year of the trial is that overwhelmingly participants were keen to self-direct and certainly to be engaged in selecting providers, but actually opted to have their NDIA manage their funds. So the funds were in a portal and therefore the provider claimed against the portal. So that was a very new experience for providers who had never gone onto any system and made a claim. So just in terms of your preparation, in terms of understanding what claiming is versus what invoicing was very important. There were some participants who decided to self-manage, where they were totally responsible for managing all the financial transactions of finding a provider, going to provider, getting their supports, the provider invoicing them, and then paying the provider directly their invoice. And we have some experience of that. And again, for providers, it was a bit of a learning curve for those providers who suddenly had participants coming towards them and paying them directly. So getting your back of office systems up and running were very important. But in terms of plan management, basically in the first year, which is a new function in the agency, which has 2 sub-programs in it, one's financial and one's service intermediary, nobody really took that up in any shape or form in the first year. Now in the second year, we've got ACT, NT and Western Australia on board, and I've just come back from the ACT, and plan management seems to be not quite the flavour of the month, but it's certainly being taken up by a number of providers. But it's very early days, we're only 4 or 5 months into that trial, and we don't really have any plan management providers actually experiencing how to deliver that yet. So we've been doing some work with providers about the registered to be a plan manager and what does that mean, because as I said, it has 2 functions. One is to take on board financial intermediary for the participant, therefore paying bills, doing all of that, and the second part of that is a service intermediary role, which is that capacity building, getting people ready in terms of being able to take more direction of self-management. And there are, I think, a number of reasons why plan management hasn't been taken up. But we also, plan management is a function that gets paid for by the agency on top of their current budget. It's not taken out of their budget. So there's actually a fee attached that the agency will give to participants if they choose to want to take on a plan manager. The thing we're seeing with plan managers is that they can be a registered provider of support as well as being a plan manager. So you can play both those roles as an organisation, but if you do take on that role as an organisation, you have to be able to separate those functions in your organisation. So we've got a number of providers who have put their hand up. I think we've got about 10% of registered providers across the trial site. So there's just over 170 odd providers who have registered. And most of those are going to operate in both spaces. They're going to operate and be providers of supports, but also be plan managers. And how they separate those 2 functions is what we've been working with providers to help them get across that.
Just with that, are there any, I think it's possible, I'm not sure if people are interested in the room, but I'm certainly interested in what are we learning about why people haven't been taking it up.
Yeah, okay. I was just up in the Hunter trial on Friday exploring this with providers, because it was quite interesting that we had quite a number of providers up in the Hunter trial putting their hand up, but nobody coming towards them, no participant coming towards them and wanting to be a plan manager. And I think it's a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a brand new concept for participants, certainly in New South Wales. There has been some projects like your project, which is looking at direct payment options, but it's relatively new. So not a lot of people have even experienced that, although it started. So the first thing was that we actually had participants really not sure about what plan management was. It's also brand new for the planners in terms of their conversations with participants about the three options. And on talking to a number of the planners, the whole concept of going through and doing a plan is quite satisfying for the family, but it's often sometimes quite overwhelming in the amount of what's new. And so it hasn't been actively promoted from the planner's point of view in saying you've got these three options. Often the planners have been saying, we've talked to the participant about what they want to do, and they're happy with their plan, happy with the fact they know their budget, and that's about all they would like to do in the first instance, because they know they'll come back every year and have another conversation with the planner. So in terms of the participant wanting to actively go down that pathway, much more needs to be done in terms of everybody understanding, I think, the function. And I think then the other thing is that plan managers, who are the providers like you in the room, although they've put their hand up and said we'd like to be a plan manager, haven't really known how to promote it to potential participants. So when we started talking to providers about, well, what are you doing in terms of your marketing space? What are you putting on your website? How are you having conversations with families about it? They've been a little bit sort of at a loss, a little bit at sea about how to really nail how you talk about plan management to participants. So I think we've got on both sides a little bit of unknown, a bit hard to explain, nobody having really a lot of experience, and also I think the concept of working out whether or not the price that the agency is prepared to pay for you to be a plan manager is a little bit of an unknown. So people have been quite hesitant, I think, to walk into that space at this point in time. But I think that will come with more time, more experience, and greater promotion and understanding.
Thank you. Are there any comments?
Thanks. Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's important, although this is only in the first not quite 18 months of the trial, funds that or plans that are include in-kind services from government to government essentially cannot be managed by an individual. That funding for in-kind support has to be managed by the NDIA. So that immediately, in the early stages, although that won't continue, but in the early stages, that makes sense. Secondly, if you look at this stage, the majority of people who are accessing the NDIS at the moment, they are people with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities, around between 30 and 40%, depending on which trial sites you're looking at. I don't know if we have stats on how many of those or what percentage of those individuals also have families supporting them or who are, don't have that kind of support. But I think again that makes sense. If this were, if it were 70% of trial site participants were adults with physical disabilities and no intellectual or developmental disabilities, then it would make sense that more of them would want a much more hands-on role. And also, we expect in Queensland that it will be a slightly higher take-up rate to start with, because the trial sites will have been going longer. There will have been a lot more learnings. Providers themselves and all the trial sites will have a much better understanding of it. In Queensland, we'll have already done it through Your Life, Your Choice and host provision. Not quite the same, but at least understanding the concepts. And also, I could say, in terms of providers offering those services to individuals and families, they've got to know why people would choose to pay extra, although the agency funds it, but to pay someone to manage aspects of their plan. And it's not always because people are not competent to do it or not interested in doing it. Often it's simply a question of time. It certainly is in my family. So, once again, it's really critical to not make assumptions, but to ask people, not just do you want to manage your plan, or would you like us to help you manage your plan, but how does your life work? How can we support you in your life?
I probably just want to stop there because there might be many questions or some questions from people in the room, and I don't want to leave you with only 5 minutes at the end of the discussion. So I'll take some questions, and I'll just get you to speak up so we have no mic here today.
Okay. Just a question about people whose funds that are currently managed by the public trustee. How did you find that working in the trial sites? Because, like for example, in Queensland, you may need to engage with the agent or the person at the public trustee to discuss how their funds are managed. So, just wondering how that went.
All those arrangements are staying in place. So if there is a public trustee involved with the participant, the agency is involving them in all of the discussions around about the plan, and also if they've got responsibility for financial management of that person's funds, then they're engaged as well. We tried to invite the public trustee to come along to our session on Friday, but they weren't able to attend just because of short notice. But we are having some preliminary discussions about, often the public trustees really only decision making about some parts of the finances and not all of that. And they certainly don't want to take on the responsibility of being a service intermediary. So there's going to be an intersection conversation that I think needs to happen over the next part of the trial.
Just got a question about plan management and how in the trial sites not-for-profits are managing to survive on the money available for plan managing. Do the trial sites currently still have block funding or other individual funding that's coming to them, as well as taking on the NDIA or NDIS with individuals? Or is that like a separate thing that they're doing, and then they're still receiving other funding as a sustainable thing? I don't know. Anyway.
That comes back to the concept of in-kind
Yeah.
funds. And in general, I think it's fair to say that block funding is basically going to transition out, and it will be individualised funding.
But are the existing organisations at the moment, they're still surviving on, say, block funding or whatever, and also then taking on NDIS, or is it like, is there money in NDIS for an organisation to be able to survive?
They're using up the contract funding that they already have.
So in each trial, the arrangements are slightly different and quite complex, and as Fiona said, if you've got any in-kind arrangements still with the state, it makes it a little bit messier. But basically, as a participant transitions into the scheme, if you're on a block grant, the block grant in most of the trials will be deducted as that person transitions. They become a cash-paying participant. So yes, so there are some transition issues for a number of providers, particularly if you are operating only in the trial site. So all of your funds will at some point in that trial convert from being state government supported to then being NDIA.
Okay.
But we've got a number of providers who are operating not only in the trial site but have other operations outside. So they've got a little bit of a buffer going at the moment, but once full implementation comes on board, yes, it'll be different. It'll be more difficult.
So is there anybody at the moment that's just doing the NDIS, like as a project without having any in-kind supports?
There are a couple of providers in Hunter who are solely operating in Hunter, and their block grant has been gradually deducted at each of those sites. And there's a few. There's a few in all trial sites basically.
Yes, the lady on the back there. Yep.
Just going back to the plan management, so you've said that will be funded separately to the funds required for the participants' actual services. How, from a participant perspective, how does the choice, like they've got the NDIA, the agency can do it, or another provider, how is that choice presented to them, and is it exactly the same? So they come to you and they go, okay, I want the agency to manage it, or I want another provider. Do they have to go through the same process to access the agency and other providers, or is it easier for them to say, I'll stick with the agency?
I don't think it's quite like that, and
Right.
I don't think it's sort of more or less easy. But the real distinguishing feature is if you manage the funds yourself, you don't have to use a registered service or support provider. And if the agency manages the funds, then the agency will only work with registered providers. So that's really the kind of the strongest feature from the participant's point of view. But that's likely to evolve quite quickly, I would imagine, in the next few years. Peter?
Paul, you talked about 2015 being the transitional year. Does that mean that you're looking at Your Life, Your Choice morphing closer to what a plan manager or a funds manager may be under NDIA? Or is it about saying at a point in time Your Life, Your Choice will cease to exist as such, and during that time will assist people to have a transition plan to go one way or the other, or to cease operating altogether?
I think you'd be wishing me luck if we were going to say it was going to cease. No, we're certainly not seeing Your Life, Your Choice ceasing. What I guess we're looking to do is, as we become clearer about what the options are for plan management, we work with host providers around how we adapt the role to feature more like a plan management role. As Fiona said, there's already a lot of elements that are similar, and there are some elements that are not. It may be that there's some things we can't deal with. So, for example, payment in advance. I suspect we're not going to play too much with that because of our systems and our payment processes and so on are so complex that to try to change that arrangement would be very difficult. I think though what we're seeing with the trial sites and the development of the National Disability Insurance Agency is that the practice is evolving. So you'd be aware that in some of the trial sites there's currently combined plan or LAC roles. So there are things happening to adapt what was originally the process that was being used, and I suspect we'll see more of that over time. And so what we're trying to do with NDIA is come to an understanding about the plan management role and how that might look, and how then we might assist host providers to get to a place that's similar to that.
Sorry, just to follow up, would that also include red tape reduction because currently under Your Life, Your Choice, there are a lot of requirements of providers that aren't requirements, for example, under an NDIS whatsoever, to provide that middleman type of role in reporting and a whole range of things.
Yeah, and look, it's going to be an ongoing issue for us, I suspect. The problem we've got is that with funding in advance, we have to rely on reporting from service providers for our data. So NMDS data, the only way we can collect that is from providers. With the NDIA, that data is being collected as invoices are paid. So, there's a completely different approach to how that's handled. I don't think we're going to be able to change that in the next 18 months or so. We may be able to make it a bit more flexible, but I don't think we'll change the basic components of how that's being done.
So 2 questions, one to Deb. Is there any evidence that the NDS has got around self-direct models from other jurisdictions outside of Australia around what plan management take-up is over time?
We
And-
did.
And the second question, I guess, is no follow-up.
Okay, yes. So certainly NDS has done some research in that area, and you would understand that the UK adopted very early a sort of self-direction, self-payment sort of model. The research from that was very much that there was never any, depending on a point in time, anywhere between I think 10 and 20% of anybody with a disability had taken up some sort of self-management arrangement during that time. If you look at the Productivity Commission's report, they actually have a really nice chapter about all of the other literature and research about that. And the anticipation wasn't with the scheme, as we understood it, that there would be, massive uptake very quickly. It's something that comes with time, but also there wasn't an expectation that it was going to be a lot different from the other jurisdictions. So I think also Canada has a similar model, as had the New Zealand for a little while as well. Theirs didn't really get going very well. But really, it's been anywhere between about 10 and 20% of pure self-management. But the idea of self-direction has certainly become broader.
Anything in plan management in those jurisdictions?
Yeah, plan management is hard to compare because it's not how it's been described now with the agency. Currently done exactly the same in other jurisdictions. So there's always been a little bit of modification. So again, plan management has been taken up to a limited amount, but certainly it's still in that smaller range, somewhere less than 20%. Yeah.
And Paul, in light of that transitional approach next year, the Queensland market since the inception of YLYC has become conditioned to expect to pay for plan management. What's the department's view about how they expect to change public opinion then, that would be a paid option into the future? And what ideas do you have around transitioning that rather than just... Because I don't share your enthusiasm around the fact that because we have plan management type model that people are likely to take it up here. I think you'll see people running a mile because they've been used to paying for something and then they'll be given an option not to pay for it.
Look, one of the challenges we've got is moving the views of people from dollars to support. I know Fiona has mentioned a number of times in the past about the experience that NDIA is having with planning discussions with people where it's difficult for people to understand that what they're focusing on is their support, not on the dollars that come with that support. That's I think one of the key things that we'd be wanting to try and shift in the next 18 months or so, is to get people starting to focus more on the support they get than on the dollars associated with that support. Now, it's difficult in Queensland because we all know it's a capped and ration system, and we all know that a lot of the participants in Your Life, Your Choice are people who fought very hard for every last cent of the packages of support they currently have. However, I think to assist people to start thinking in a different way about that is very important, because there will be variations in the support arrangements that people see when they move into the NDIA. Maybe more, maybe less in terms of dollars, but it's the support that's the important element of that we need to focus on. I think it's a really difficult cultural change for people, but I think that's one of the things we've got to focus on, is how we get people to think more about that support than the dollars.
Can I just add to that quickly? Absolutely, it's a major cultural change, but it's also a two-way street. How can people think about the supports they want, or actually think about buying them, if they don't know if those supports are yet delivered, or if providers are willing to deliver them? So again, it's this connection process that needs to happen. Providers need to ask existing and potential clients, what is it they actually want?
I'm sorry to jump in. Can I suggest there is another major difference? It's about marketing. Don't forget, under NDIA, the plan management is additional to package, whereas in Your Life, Your Choice, it's part of package. So people who are used to paying it, if they take up the option under the NDIA, they're actually getting that resourced on top of their package. So the incentive to run to the NDIA to do it maybe isn't there as much, because they're actually going to lose out in terms of dollars.
Thank you.
Isn't it correct, though, that the single greatest difference between the NDIA and Your Life, Your Choice is that there's a capped funding as far as how much you pay for unit cost price? So the NDIA has set a capped price for an hour's support. That's not the case under Your Life, Your Choice.
There is a pricing schedule in the transition in the trial sites.
Yep.
And it will that will gradually change but the pricing is based on what the agency believes, based on research, is a market price.
I know, and there's some significant discussion about that.
Yeah.
So for instance, what might be the cost of an hour's support for accommodation support? My understanding is that's currently in the vicinity of about $36 an hour,
It varies slightly from each trial site.
which means that many organisations who provide accommodation support are out of business. Totally different. That is totally different to under Your Life, Your Choice. Whether you're, as an agency, providing $5 an hour, $50 an hour, that's up to you to negotiate with the individual.
Well, in the agency, under the NDIS, you wouldn't just be providing something called accommodation support. You'd really be drilling down a lot more deeply into the types of supports that you're providing and linking them to the goals and the participants' plans. It's the concept of unfunded supports, which I hear a lot in Queensland, is something that we really have to, understand more clearly in relation to the types of supports the NDIA offers. Yes, they're bundled. They can be bundled together, but they don't have to be. They can be purchased singly as well.
We've got to race to the bottom line. You know, the cheapest unit cost price versus, you know, that Freddie down the road might be able to provide versus what a service provider can provide with all of the requirements, legislative requirements, work cover, workplace health and safety, current equality monitoring schedules, you know, the human services, all of those things all add up. I'm assuming that they will be applied across the board.
Could I just maybe ask Deb to speak about the NDS position
Yeah.
on pricing?
Yeah, I think you've raised a really interesting question about a regulated market or a deregulated market, and certainly at the moment all the trial sites are operating in a regulated market, except for some of the prices. So accommodation is actually a quotable price. So there's an opportunity to actually operate in a deregulated fashion there. But for the moment, the trial is regulated, and NDS is saying we need to have an opportunity for providers to have that opportunity while trial is still happening to see what deregulation will look like. So we have, certainly with the pricing, joint pricing project that came out that you'll find on the NDIA website, there was some discussion about movement of some of those capped prices. Those maximum prices were not going to be sustainable in the future, and certainly NDS has put forward to the agency that we've got 18 months left of trial. It seems reasonable to try to test deregulation during trial if we can as well. Because yes, you're right, people need to know how to be able to do that. You've got experience here, but not everybody has got experience about how to know their unit price and then their unit cost and their price. So we really need to be able to test that during trial.
Thanks.
I've got a question here from a colleague who was unable to attend, so please bear with me as I read it out. This question is about managing the volume of planning to be completed as Queensland transitions from its current system to the NDIS. It is expected that the number of eligible participants under NDIS will rise from the current 45,000 accessing services to 97,000 by 2019. This is an increase of 52,000 people who will need a plan developed and implemented between July 2016 and July 2019, and their plan reviewed after 1 year. For the new plans alone, this is 1,444 plans per month, every month from July 2016 to June 2019. How will this be managed to ensure quality in planning, as well as ensuring the hallmarks of the NDIS, i.e. increased social and economic participation, are achieved?
I might just make a general comment. At present, those of you who are aware of the heads of agreement between the state and the Commonwealth would be aware that we have to have a bilateral agreement with the Commonwealth negotiated by the end of this year. We're expecting that high-level agreement will be completed by the end of 2015. That will then allow the state and the Commonwealth governments and NDIA to start the negotiation about that transition process during 16 to 19. There are a number of ways in which that could happen, and there are likely to be a number of different scenarios that are considered as part of that. It is the case, though, that in all of those, I think NDIA has recently made some general comments about their view that the current scheme is unscalable to full implementation. And so there is a lot of negotiation going on around how do we move from a situation we're currently in where we've got, I think it's roughly 20,000 people across Australia accessing NDIA to the 400 odd thousand we're expecting in 2019. So I don't know that there's a clear answer to that question. There is a lot of discussion and negotiation to go on about how do we ensure that people who transition have access to the right opportunities for service delivery. The other thing, just in a general sense, is that we also know from the trial sites that a lot of people with lower support needs who might be part of that extra 40,000 it is in Queensland are often not presenting as rapidly to NDIA. And so, we may find that in fact the target is 97,000 people who are likely to be eligible, but in fact the number of people who present prior to July 2019 may well be less than that. And other people will, turn up over time as they have a need that needs to be considered. So I appreciate the highly complex maths involved, but I'm not sure that it's quite as simple as that.
It does raise the question then in relation to advocacy, because at the moment advocacy in relation to individuals living with a disability is state funded. At this moment I don't know, is there a provision for the NDIA to fund that, or is it simply going to be carried empty?
Just to be clear, in fact the majority of advocacy in Queensland is funded through the Commonwealth Department of Social Services. Mm-hmm. Queensland does contribute funding to advocacy services in Queensland. I was going to mention before, in relation to that question around public trustee, there's a major piece of work that will shortly be coming out around quality and safeguards. So as part of this process, there's a wonderful process called the Regulatory Impact Statement, which is basically a process the Commonwealth Government goes through to look at the impact of implementation of something like NDIA on a whole range of other legislation. So the Quality and Safeguards RIS, I can't say Regulatory Impact Statement every time, the Quality and Safeguards RIS will focus on all of those areas like our quality frameworks, our guardianship arrangements, our state management arrangements, advocacy, and I'm sure I've missed something out, but that whole cluster of things that need to be considered as part of the implementation of NDIS. So that's a public process. I understand the RIS is likely to be released early next year. I don't know whether you've got any more details. Yeah, sort of February, March is the sort of time frame I'd heard as well. So keep an eye out for that, because that will provide an opportunity for stakeholders in the sector to be contributing to the development of thinking around how that's managed.
We have a couple more questions, and we only have 5 minutes left, so I just want to refocus a bit, but then I'll come back to the latest. One of the questions I have there, particularly for Paul, is to discuss the future of the Your Life, Your Choice program. And you said earlier you don't expect it to go away, but I'm thinking that's not until 2016 at least. But if you would comment on thoughts there, and there's probably nothing set in stone yet, but just speak to that so people are... Yeah, okay. So look, at the answer to that question in a real sense relies a lot on our decisions about the phasing to the NDIS. So
At the moment, the Heads of Agreement talks about that transition occurring between July 2016 and July 2019. Our thinking is that over that time we will gradually transition people into the NDIS. Essentially that means we'll turn off state services and funding as people enter the NDIA. It's a very complex process, a lot more difficult than that sounds, but essentially I would see that the option for Your Life, Your Choice would continue to exist in Queensland until we transition the last person with existing funding. So, you know, how that turns out across the 3 years, what that actually looks like, we don't know just yet, but certainly that's one thing that will also become clearer next year as we get that more detail around the phasing and transition process.
Thank you.
And so I just make a comment about that. I think the experience of providers has been in transition, that there's business as usual that just has to keep, you know, clocking along while your individuals and families transition. And it is a hard time when you've because it doesn't often happen for an organisation at once, that you've got a foot in one camp where you've got business as usual with your current state arrangements while you're trying to move into something that's brand new as well. And that will take time. That does cause a lot of anxiety and concern, but you just can't turn off the tap one day and turn it on to NDI the next day. So there is a period of time where you have a foot in two camps. Yeah.
Thank you. Just two more questions, sorry. Yeah.
Just in relation to that, I realise that you don't have a set date, but you know, when disability services are still currently transitioning post-schooling families into a Your Life, Your Choice funded supports, at some point they must have to stop doing that in order to say, no, you need to redirect to the NDA. So is there a plan around that time frame?
Yeah, and look, it depends on how we phase those arrangements. So you'd be aware with the trial sites that there's a few different models. There's a cohort model, so in Tasmania and South Australia, they're focusing on support for young people in Tasmania in that post-school group. In South Australia, it's an increasing number of children, very young children. The other alternative is a geographic process. So Hunter Valley, the Victorian trial site, the Perth one, based on a geography, and Northern Territory, based on geography. So depending on the model we choose and the process we go through, you may deal with that in different ways. So if we do it geographically, we might say we phase certain areas of the state first and then gradually over time. Clearly, you know, as that happens, you have to take account of things like how you transition people in those particular cohorts. I encourage you, if you get an opportunity, to have a look at the ACT agreement for their transition process, because it does include some consideration of how they're transitioning people over the next 2 years, I think it is, in ACT. And it picks up on some of those particular cohorts that need to be considered as part of that.
And so what is the time frame around making that final decision about how that will look?
So the high-level agreement is the end of this calendar year, and I think at the moment we're expecting that we'll get some more detail about that with NDIA and the Commonwealth Government probably by about the middle of next year.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Last question, because we're nearly out of time.
Given that the NDIS is going to be based on, as it looks to me, an insurance type model, that, I guess, in essence, then lends itself to being a much more commercial arrangement with service providers and families. So, around regulation of plan providers and working with plan providers, what are the NDIA going to, how are they going to facilitate those plan providers being accountable?
To be registered as a provider with the agency, there are a number of requirements that we have to meet, and one of those requirements is complying with state legislation and regulatory requirements. So I think there's absolute clear understanding of the need for those kind of that kind of oversight, and it's in development. For example, Paul said there'll be the agency's working towards a national quality framework instead of 7 different jurisdictional ones. But essentially, if you're going to be registered as a provider with the agency, you have to comply with the kinds of legislative and other requirements that you'd expect. If you're not planning to register as a provider with the agency, you don't have to comply with that, you just have to obey the law.
Is there a time frame when that will be available, when those?
In Queensland?
Yes.
That'll depend on the outcome of the bilateral agreement, which is being negotiated between the Queensland and Commonwealth governments.
There is a good document on the NDIA website now, just to give you some sort of sense of what that looks like. It's called the suitability of requirements for providers. So it states for those currently in trial what sorts of quals, skills, etc. are required if you're going to deliver supports. So if you go onto the website and have a look, I would imagine that Queensland would be in a similar position in terms of, yes, you have to be able to meet the compliance of your current state QA system, but it also goes through those who are brand new and wanting to register, what sort of suitability criteria is required. So have a look at that as well.
Okay, we are out of time, so I just wanted to ask anyone up the front here if there are any final comments to the group. Obviously, I think it's just as important that we're hearing that we don't have the answers yet, and when they might come or be worked out, as hearing some stuff that we do know currently. But are there any final comments you'd like to make to the group, and then we'll close up?
Yeah, thank you. Just very simply, although it's complex and there are many issues that need to be worked through over the next few years, it's really important that for participants and families, we don't make it complicated for them. You know, we put ourselves in their shoes essentially every time we think about what needs to happen, how we need to market ourselves, or think about it from their point of view. So keep it as simple as possible, please.
Yep.
And look, I guess the main thing for me would be I'd encourage you all to check out as much of that information about the NDIA that is available at present, because it is developing, and I think there are a number of learnings from the trial sites that we can take advantage of. And understand some of those impacts on organisations and how those have been worked through. So, and by all means, keep in touch with us and with the team around some of those developments that we're looking to make.
And I'd echo Fiona's comment there about keeping things simple. I think often under change, you try to make things more complicated than they actually are. I think your experience with Your Life and Your Choice is a really great grounding in terms of understanding self-direction, payments, etc. It's not probably going to look exactly the same in plan management, but that capacity building, you understanding your back of office and getting all that ready, you're in a very good position that many of your colleagues in the other trial sites really didn't have that time and energy available to them because trials started last year for them and they didn't have that lead time. So use your lead time really well in terms of building your own capacity and understanding and having great conversations now with the people that you support about what the future may look like.
Thank you very much. So thank you, Paul. Thanks, Fiona. Thanks, Bev. And I'll just